Check 1 2 check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2 check.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you can believe it, we are at the end of this book. I never thought the day would come. If we look back to the very first chapter, the very first video, you'll see it's been a while because I look younger. Talking about the Kurt Cobain case has literally aged me over the past 4 or 5 years. Anyway, we're at the last chapter. Then there's what they titled the final chapter, which was written after Kurt's death. I had mentioned previously I might read it in a live chat. I think I'd rather just go ahead, record it, let everybody listen to it, then we'll have a live chat. And I want to talk about the stories from this book for those of you who have actually watched those videos. Now, coming up next, Alice in Chains, the untold story of Alice in Chains will be the next book that we start on, and I promise you it's not going to be like this one. We're going to read that one much faster. I want it done by the end of the year, not 4 years from now or whatever. This book represents something to me that's so special. This book was the beginning of my channel. This book was the beginning of friendships, people that I've met online that I would have otherwise never known. So many people have been so good to me over the years that it's, I don't know, it's just like a sentimental thing. I don't know how to explain it. I'm a man. I don't explain emotions, damn it. If I tell you that I care, then I care. Now leave me be. Before we start, I want you all to know that I have worked out a schedule and what I call an efficiency schedule. From here on out, you're going to get 3 shorts a week. You're going to get 1 common video a week, meaning a story about a band that we care about or a chapter of a book once a week. Then once a month, you're going to get a very well thought out, well researched, written video. A big part of the reason why my channel has not grown is I've been very inconsistent. There have been months where I've done nothing. As well, the algorithm has changed. People are more into short content now. I did a lot of research into analytics. I watched videos created by top brass at YouTube to tell content creators what's going on. Basically, your channel is not going to grow and be suggested to new people anymore unless you're also producing short content. So that's why you're going to start seeing 3 shorts a week out of this channel, because I want people to watch my longer videos, and they will not suggest my longer videos if I don't provide short content as well. However, I will make sure that every short I make has something interesting. I'll make sure that those are not, just filler. Chapter 15, the grown-ups don't like it. And by the way, in the Nirvana history series, there's one more video I need to make to complete that series, and it starts with this. Once the album was completed, In Utero, the band sent unmastered tapes off to Geffen president Ed Rosenblatt and Gary Gersh, as well as their lawyer and the inner circle of Gold Mountain. Kurt's description of their feedback was succinct. The grown-ups don't like it, he said, with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. In fact, the grown-ups, management and senior label execs, hated it. Kurt says they told him the songwriting was not up to par, the sound unlistenable. There also seemed to be uncertainty whether mainstream radio would go for the Steve Albini sound. As it turns out, says Albini, the record company would much rather they made an indulgent rock star album, because then they'd have something to promote, and the band would be broke, and the more broke the band is, the better it is for the record company, because then they can pull the strings more. That's true. My upcoming Tool video, Maynard Keenan, is talking all about this stuff, and I'm basically going to be explaining how the record industry worked in the 90s and how they kept bands under their thumb by keeping them in debt. It turned out that few people at Gold Mountain or Geffen really wanted the band to record with Albini to begin with, although the band was free to have their way. Faced with the disapproval of virtually everyone involved in Nirvana's career, Kurt thought he was getting an unstated message: scrap the album and start all over again. There was still plenty of time, and the Albini sessions hadn't cost all that much, considering they were following up a quadruple platinum album. You would think that by this time they would trust Kurt. I understand that In Utero is a whole other beast. In Utero is a much more raw, just tough, gritty album compared to Nevermind. However, they didn't even know that Nevermind was going to be such a hit. Remember, Kurt Cobain changed the industry. He changed pop culture. He changed everything. So why wouldn't they say, let's just leave this guy alone, man? Maybe he can change it again. Instead, they're like, no, we need more Nevermind. But pre-Nevermind, they didn't even want Nevermind, right? They didn't even think Nevermind would do good. Nothing worse than a record executive. And A&R people, what does Kurt say about it? Self-appointed judges judge more than they have sold. Once again, Kurt Cobain hits the nail on the head and describes something that in one sentence that we can't describe in a paragraph. I should just re-record this record, Kurt sneers, and do the same thing we did last year because we sold out last year. There's no reason to try to redeem ourselves as artists at this point. I can't help myself. I'm just putting out a record that I would like to listen to at home. I never listened to Nevermind. I haven't listened to it since we put it out. That says something. I can't stand that kind of production, and I don't listen to bands that do have that kind of production. No matter how good their songs are, it just bothers me. Friends of the band loved the record, however. As of early April, the band was determined to release the record as it was, and damn the torpedoes. They're going to eat my shit, Kurt says. Of course, they want another Nevermind. But I'd rather die than do that. This is exactly the kind of record I would buy as a fan, that I would enjoy owning. I couldn't be truer to myself than to put this out the way it is. It's my favorite production and my favorite songs. But even right after returning from Minnesota, and before anyone else had heard the tracks, Kurt and Krist were beginning to worry about the bass sound, which they felt was too mushy and not musical enough, and the vocals, which were too low in the mix, the latter a common complaint leveled at Albini's productions. Still, those reservations took a backseat to their resolve to release an unvarnished, straightforwardly recorded album. In hindsight, it's obvious that Nevermind was a strong rightward swing of the band's artistic pendulum toward pop, while In Utero leans more heavily on the arty, aggressive side, which was showcased on Incesticide. There's always been songs like About a Girl, and there's always been songs like Paper Cuts, Krist says. Nevermind came out kind of about a girl, and this one came out more Paper Cuts. It's an artistic thing. The label's all freaked out about it. It's like, shit, it's art. What are you going to do about it? The record called the bluff of all the music biz pundits who held the triumph of real music over the processed pop that Nirvana had trounced. One or two of those pundits worked with Nirvana, and Utero forced them to put their money where their mouths were. The thing about Nevermind was it just flew out the window, Krist says, and now nobody can predict anything in the music industry anymore. There is no real way to know. For every one pop song that hits the charts, there were 1,000 pop songs that were written that do no good. So I don't know why anybody would try to predict anything when it comes to the music industry because, quite frankly, you never know. The band was prepared not to match the gargantuan sales of Nevermind, although In Utero was really good. It was not necessarily really commercial. I expect this record will sell maybe half as much, Kurt predicts. We've offended too many people within the last year. Dave doesn't think the album will do as well either. Not that he even wants it to. Not at all, he says. I kind of think of it sometimes as a test. We're testing the limits. A record like Nevermind came along and it blew things apart, and it changed a lot of stuff. By doing this, maybe the next big hit could be on an 8-track. A band from out of nowhere could have an 8-track recording of a great song, and it will be on the radio. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones did it. Nowadays that happens frequently. Wasn't Justin Bieber discovered on YouTube? Like, a lot of artists just get discovered from recording themselves with a phone. In a sense, the band could afford to take a chance, since nobody knew exactly why the last album took off. How could anybody second guess this one? Besides, Nirvana would likely take a pounding no matter what they did. It's a sophomore jinx. Everybody's just waiting for us to fuck up, says Dave. Everybody's waiting to tear this to shreds and say, people who like Nirvana will like this record. Everybody's waiting to tear this to shreds and say, the one-hit wonder. I know that it's a good record. I know that people who like Nirvana will like this record. The 75,000 people that were into Nirvana before Nevermind, I think will like the record maybe even more than Nevermind. So this isn't career suicide. No, although it will be thought of as that, Kurt says. The album that brought them down to the gutter. These are the songs we came up with, says Krist. If you don't make a raw album, you make another slick album, and then people say, oh, they just made a slick album so they can sell more records. They just made a slick album so they can sell more records. Nickelback, remember that band? They were like Nirvana wannabes that took the Nevermind formula and just did it over and over and over until people hated their guts. Even their own fans got sick of it and booed them off the stage every time they'd try to play. You can't win for losing. Let them say what they will. I did it my way. I told Kurt, if this record bombs and it doesn't do anything, there's still all those years we spent in the van and all the good times we had. We were happy back then, and nobody can take that away from us, Krist says. The music speaks for itself. We put out good records. So what if we have to play 1,500 seaters? So what if Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots keep going to all the music award shows? We were never into that shit in the first place. Albini had been impressed that Kurt, Krist, and Dave wanted to try to forge new creative ground instead of making a record that was just a retread of the successful ideas of their last record. Frankly, that's all the record company wanted or expected, and to date, that's what they still want. Albini claimed a month or so after the album was completed. What they don't understand is that it represents the band more accurately, and it is more faithful to the band's vision of their record than a record made any other way would be. You could put that band in the studio for a year, and I don't think they could come up with a better record, Albini continues. I think that's as good as they're going to be. Well, as good as they're going to be is the best, because here we are 30 years later still celebrating these albums. If that doesn't suit their record company, then their record company clearly has problems that go beyond this record. The record company has a problem with the band. The sooner everybody involved recognizes that, the easier it will be on everybody. The people at the record company are clearly geniuses, right? Says Albini. They put out Nelson. They know what they're doing. This is the record company that sued Neil Young for not being commercial enough. Those are the people that are telling the band they don't know what they're doing. If you have to rely on people like that as your barometer of quality, then you're in a lot more trouble than just having a bad record. It means you're a fool. Literally, every other person involved in the enterprise that is Nirvana, besides the band itself, are pure pieces of shit, Albini rails. Their management company, their record company, the A&R people, all the hangers-on, all the phonies that cling to that band as a bogus source of hipster credentials, everyone associated with the band, other than the band, I think are pieces of shit, and I have no time for them. And quite frankly, I agree with Albini. Had Kurt had good people around him, he'd still be around to this day. Either way it goes. If you want to say he did it himself, bad people around him. If you want to say people let it happen to him, bad people around him. All he needed was a couple good friends by his side. He'd still be here to this day. You know, after all this, I would be willing to do another Nirvana record, Albini said shortly after finishing the record. He would soon change his tune. I enjoyed dealing with the guys, but I would not be willing to deal with their superstructure anymore, their management company, or their record company. On March 23rd came good news. After months of legal battles, it was finally decided that none of the allegations made against Kurt and Courtney in family court were legally valid. Cobains had already won legal custody of their daughter, but now the Department of Children's Services would not supervise Kurt and Courtney's care of Francis any longer. No more humiliating urine tests. No more checkup visits from social workers. No more costly legal fights. The nightmare was over. So Kurt makes it through the worst period of his life. The nightmare is over, and now he wants to exit? Doesn't make sense, does it? On April 9th, the band raised over $50,000 at a benefit at the Cow Palace in San Francisco for the Tresnovinki Women's Group, an organization based in the Croatian city of Zagreb that assists our survivors. Part of the vicious campaign of ethnic cleansing, this is really messed up, dude. Listen to this. This is totally real. Serbian soldiers had been... Okay, sorry, I'll start the sentence over. As part of the vicious campaign of ethnic cleansing, Serbian soldiers had been systematically R-ing Muslim women so that they would eventually have Serbian babies. The victims are often mutilated, their children murdered right in front of them. So these Serbian soldiers go in, they kill all the men, they kill all the children. Then they are the women with this thought that if you can't beat it out of them, breed it out of them. And their thought was, well, if they have our babies, they'll be Serbian babies and they'll somehow be better. How is it that this just keeps happening on Earth over and over? Like, this is just one conflict out of hundreds, thousands, where, genocide has happened. That's a whole other story. There's actually a theory that the reason why women can get over relationships quicker than men is because of what we just talked about. For thousands and thousands of years, ever since we were cavemen, ever since we were primitive, men would go into other villages, camps, whatever, kill the men and children, and then give the women a choice. You can either become our wives and live, or you can die along with your family. And this is not my theory, by the way. It's a theory I read in some university study. Once a woman decides a relationship is over, it's over. There's no going back. But a man will dwell on it for a long time before he finally decides it's over. Scientists, researchers believe that it's because of genocide just happening over and over again. It's a survival technique. Women had to, if they wanted to live, they had to get over the last man that was just killed and go to this man, right? It's just a theory. It's not my theory. Don't bitch at me if you don't like it, but it does make sense. Evolution is something that we understand, but we don't really know how it works at its core. And it could be the reason why women often get over relationships quicker than men do, just to survive. The benefit was Krist's idea. I was really pissed off by everything I'd been reading, and nobody was doing anything about it. He says, after some initial encouragement from Courtney, he started putting together the show, which also featured the disposable heroes of hip-hoperacy, the Breeders, and L7. You made my shit list. Back in December of 1991, Krist also helped lead protesters against Washington State House Bill 2554, better known as the Erotic Music Bill. Back in December of 91, Krist led a march and petition drive at the state capitol building in Olympia. MTV News and Rolling Stone picked up the story, and the governor's office was inundated with letters from people who opposed the bill. But Governor Booth Gardner, who only recently had boasted in his 92 State of the State address that he was the governor of the home state of Nirvana, the hottest new rock band in the country, signed the bill into law. So he uses the band's notoriety and fame for his own political gain, and then he goes against everything that they stand for and believe in. Yeah, that sounds like a politician. It was repealed, although its sponsor is vowing to submit a modified version of the bill. There's a lot of rap music and rock music for that matter. Andrew Dice Clay, that's just fucking bullshit. It's just sexist crap, Krist says. But you have to tolerate it. You have to tolerate hate groups too, because that's the price you pay for freedom of speech. You place your ideals above your feelings. I can't make the KKK illegal because I don't like it. I can't do that because they have the right to believe what they want to believe. My God, where is Nirvana today? I want to read that again and just think about all the people who want to tell you how to speak, how to think, what to believe, what your moral barometer is. Be just like me or you're a fascist. You have to tolerate hate groups too, because that's the price for freedom of speech. You place your ideals above your feelings. I can't make the Ku Klux Klan illegal because I don't like it. I can't do that because they have the right to believe what they want. Where's Krist today? Why isn't he speaking up? Even though he's known as the political one, Krist doesn't exactly relish the tag, I want to depoliticize myself. I just don't want to be this rock and roll pundit, he says. I don't want Nirvana to be a political band. We're a rock band, and I'm a bass player. I just happen to be politically active. Despite the band's determination to release the record exactly as it was, blemishes and all, they began to have serious doubts about it around the time of the benefit show in San Francisco. There was even some talk of going back into the studio and recording a couple of new songs, just to see what they would sound like. By late April, Kurt's enthusiasm for the album had plummeted drastically. So right afterwards, Kurt was happy with it. He said, this is the kind of record I want to make, and I would listen to it. It's the kind of record I would be proud to own. After a few months being around David Geffen personnel and the clinger-ons and the hangers-ons who are doing the bidding of the A&R people all of a sudden Kurt is doubting it. Why is he doubting it? Because everyone around him is pushing him in that direction. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't make me as emotional as it does listening to Nevermind. Didn't Kurt just say he doesn't even listen to Nevermind? He hadn't listened to Nevermind since they made it. And now he's saying, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't make me as emotional as it does listening to Nevermind, he said of the new album. When I listen to Nevermind, I hate the production, but there's something about it that almost makes me cry at times. With this record, I'm just deadpan. That's the influence that was being put on him, and that's what these record companies do. They surround you with people who do their bidding. So if you want that artist to do something different, you make everyone around him cast doubt. And then over time, hearing this negativity over and over and over again, it makes you start to second guess your choices. It's so manipulative, it's so deceptive, it's so dirty, and apparently it worked. The hope was that the album could be saved in the mastering process, when a last wave of the electronic wand can often subtly transform a record. After working with mastering wizard Bob Ludwig at his studio in Portland, Maine, Krist was satisfied with the results, but Kurt still wasn't sure. It wasn't perfect. Of course, that was part of the deal. You record and mix in 2 weeks with Steve Albini, and you don't get pristine pop perfection. You get a raw, honest, warts and all rock record. It seemed that Kurt was in love with the idea of the low-budget philosophy, but not its actuality, not the product that it creates. Once again, his pop soul was at war with his rock sensibility. Then a brief story in the Chicago Tribune quoted Steve Albini as predicting that Geffen DGC was going to reject the Nirvana album. An item in the influential Village Voice soon picked up on the story. The story snowballed, gaining media momentum all its own. A full-page piece in Newsweek further sensationalized the issue. The piece quoted unnamed sources, here we go again with the unnamed sources, one of whom claimed to have heard the album but instead had merely heard some demos the band had recorded with Greg Montgomery during the Brazil trip. Writer Jeff Giles quoted Jonathan Poneman as saying that Geffen was guilty of a complete lack of faith and respect for Kurt, Dave Grohl, and Krist Novoselic as artists. Yet Poneman says Giles left out a key qualifier just before that statement, along the lines of, if what I hear is true, then DGC. Man, wow. Journalist, dude. Fuck 'em. In a letter to Newsweek, the band claimed Giles got quotes by saying he was merely writing a piece about Albini, not Nirvana. Most damaging to us is that Giles ridiculed our relationship with our label based on totally erroneous information, read the letter, which this band also reprinted in a costly full-page ad in Billboard. In a press release, Ed Rosenblatt vowed Geffen DGC would release anything the band submitted, and in a highly unusual move, David Geffen himself blew in an irate phone call to the magazine. Stories in Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly soon followed as the controversy ballooned even more. The truth of the matter was, the band had legitimately disliked some aspects of the Albini recordings from the start and had wanted to fix them. Didn't sound that way to me. That their management and label wholeheartedly agreed made the band appear to be spineless pushovers and their associates to seem like greedy bullies. Which is not to say that both Gold Mountain and DGC weren't relieved when some changes were eventually made. The combination of Nirvana's clout with Geffen and the creative control built into their contract ensured that they could put out whatever record they wanted to, regardless of what anyone else thought. The whole controversy, ignited by Albini's single broadside, was a byproduct of sloppy, herd mentality journalism. The one writer who got anywhere close to the truth of the matter was Jim DeRogatis of the Chicago Sun-Times. The headline to his story read, "Flap over Nirvana LP smells like bogus issue." In the piece, even Steve Albini conceded that he didn't really know what was going on with the album and that he had been speaking largely out of ignorance. So this is what created a little bit of disdain between Kurt and Nirvana and Steve Albini. I know Albini did some interviews before he unfortunately passed away. Some of the things Albini was saying in those interviews I knew to be exaggerations and lies to sort of save face for himself, but I didn't get involved in that. I didn't make any videos about it. It was on another channel. It was none of my business, is the way I put it. Albini sort of started shit because that's just who he is. He likes to start shit. The first person to go to the press was Albini. He went to the Chicago Tribune. There's like a whole story behind this. And then later he tried to say that it wasn't him who ignited this controversy when it was Steve Albini all the way. And the reason was Courtney Love. He couldn't stand her. She wasn't supposed to come to the recording in Minnesota. She shows up, sticks her nose in it, tries to tell him how to be a professional and blah, blah, blah. And he ends up calling her a psycho hose beast in the Chicago Tribune. That makes Kurt mad. They go on MTV. They say that they paid him $2 million when in fact they only paid him $100,000. It was just like petty back and forth smear campaigns. It's like people were always trying to ruin other people's reputations, right? When people have nothing worth saying, they just hit below the belt. Albini, it appeared, was also trying to have his cake and eat it too, producing a major label record for $100,000 and then disavowing the whole experience, thereby silencing cries of sellout. This wasn't the first time he had done it either. Albini had used similar tactics after doing major label productions, or rather, recordings for the Pixies and the Breeders, and no one pointed out that those avatars of indie credibility, Fugazi, had themselves rejected some recordings they made with Albini shortly before the In Utero sessions. Nobody had called them corporate stooges. The band wanted to do some work on a few songs, perhaps with REM producer Scott Litt, and remix at least a couple of tracks with, of all people, Andy Wallace. Albini vehemently rejected those ideas. He claimed he had a contract with the band that they could not remix or otherwise modify the album without his involvement. The fact that the band had not actually signed the agreement was immaterial, Albini claimed, since they had been proceeding with the project with that understanding. If it's not in black and white and signed, it doesn't mean a thing, right? Not legally anyway. Morally it does, but not legally. When Gold Mountain requested the master tapes, and Albini should have known better, he himself is so skeptical of these major label record companies. He knows how dirty they play, and then he's going to be like, well, we had a handshake and that should have been good enough. When Gold Mountain requested the master tapes, Albini at first refused to send them, then eventually changed his mind after a phone call from Krist. At the last minute, the band decided against working with Andy Wallace and instead decided to remix and augment Heart-Shaped Box and All Apologies with Scott Litt. In early May, Litt and the band worked at Bad Animal Studios, owned by the Wilson Sisters of Heart, in Seattle, and remixed the two songs, with Kurt adding acoustic guitar and Lennon-esque backing harmonies to Heart-Shaped Box. The rest of the album was left as is, although by remastering, they managed to sharpen up the bass and boost the vocals by some 3 decibels. So much for the big sellout. Now that they all live in the same town, band morale is at an all-time high. Kurt, Krist, and Dave visit each other at home and hang out and listen to music just like the old days. Late in March, while Courtney was on a quick English tour with Hole, they all met at Kurt's house to look at archival footage for a long-form video and to shoot a video for Sliver with director Kevin Kerslake. For the Sliver video, Kurt dragged out several years' worth of dolls and knickknacks from a storage space that hadn't been opened since before recording Nevermind. He set it all up in his garage so that it looked just like his old apartment back in Olympia. The band set up and rocked out, with Frances in a chair by her father's side. Kerslake manned the Super 8 camera while standing on a chair for the adult's eye view effect. Later, Kurt cut some armholes in a big piece of cardboard, placed Frances in front of it, and put his arms through it, holding her up so it looks like she's standing up on her own, dancing like a go-go girl. MTV accepted the video in mid-May, but because of its rules about product placement, required that the band cut out a few frames of footage that featured a collage of the logos of Maximum Rock and Roll and Better Homes and Gardens magazines. Unfortunately, those frames also contained a little message Kurt had written, "Indie Punks still sucks." The Sliver video showed the band in peak playful form, but even if spirits are high, the question remains as to whether the band will be a lasting proposition or just another flash in the pan. Internally, there are still many possible flashpoints. Kurt's desire to play with other people, the limitations he sees in Krist and Dave's playing, Dave's alienation from the band, the Courtney factor. Breakup rumors have long dogged the band, although it's getting to be like the boy who cried wolf. Kurt is always threatening to quit. I know we're going to put out another record after this one, Krist says. We'll play it by ear. I don't think we're going to go on and on. I think when the consensus is like, yeah, this thing's pretty much reached its course, I think we're going to know. But I know now that it's not over. And I never did during that whole pissed off time. It's just going to come naturally. We're all going to get the hit. Like, yeah, this is it. Maybe we'll take a sabbatical that will never end. I don't know. We've put out 4 albums. 4 albums is a pretty good stretch for a band. How many bands put out 4 good albums without going on to be the Scorpions or Rolling Stones or whatever? It's strange to ponder the possibility of the band lasting out the decade. I don't want it to, but it might, Kurt says. It all depends on how the songs are. I was surprised to find us working together as such a unit lately, but Kurt isn't sure how much more the 3 of them can accomplish musically. I would love to be able to play with other people and create something new, he says. I'd rather do that than stay in Nirvana. I don't want to keep rewriting this style of music. I want to start doing something really different. But there's the question of whether Krist and Dave can keep up with him. I don't know, Kurt says. I really don't know. Kurt thinks that Krist doesn't practice enough and that Dave isn't an imaginative enough player. Yet they have always come up with good touches that really complete a song. Kurt loves the bass line Krist dreamed of for Heart-Shaped Box, but Kurt now wants the collaboration to take place earlier in the songwriting process. I get really frustrated sometimes when we're trying to write a song because I'll sit there and play a riff for a long time and just listen for Krist and Dave to try to come up with something else to help change the song or go into another part, and they've hardly ever done that, Kurt says. They don't take the lead, and they're always kind of just following. I will say that is a big contradiction of Kurt Cobain. He was such a perfectionist, and he was so controlling over the art, the image, the music, everything. But then at the same time, he gets mad that somebody else won't take the lead when they're just thinking Kurt doesn't want us to take the lead. Of course, for the longest time, that's exactly what Kurt wanted, and Krist and Dave were more than willing to oblige. Now, Kurt waits for the other 2 to take the initiative without letting them know that's what he wants. But someone with that kind of imagination would almost have to be a songwriter himself. Dave writes fine songs on his own, but there's only so much a drummer can do. Krist could be a songwriter if he actually wanted to, Kurt says. If he had been working on his songwriting for the last few years, he'd probably be up to the level right now where he could help write half of a song for every riff that I come up with, and it would be really great. Then again, all the best bands are dictatorships. Yeah, that's true, Kurt says. But I would love to find people that could write songs and write them with them. That's why it's so easy to play songs with Courtney. Every time we jam on something, we write a great song. It's weird, because she's a person who takes command and isn't afraid to be the leader. And when you've got 2 leaders together, it takes a lot of pressure off both people. So here's Kurt Cobain talking about co-writing songs with Courtney Love. But he didn't help write Live Through This. It makes me wonder. A lot of people who pay attention to the lyrics on Live Through This say that it's like foreshadowing. Like Courtney's talking about what she's going to do. If Kurt did it himself, let's just hypothetically say he did it himself, and Kurt was helping Courtney write those songs, was he giving her hints as to what he was going to do and what she would have to live through? Just a thought. I've always wanted to have another person in the band that could write songs with me. Hence the occasional mutterings from Kurt's direction that he might start a band with Mudhoney's Mark Arm or Mark Lanigan from the Screaming Trees. I know we won't break up within this year, Kurt says. I guess I just have to take it 1 year at a time. In the Rolling Stone piece back in April of '92, Kurt predicted very accurately what the next album would sound like. It'll be more raw with some songs and more candy pop on some others, he said. It won't be as one-dimensional. So what might the album after In Utero sound like? Kurt thinks it will be an extension of the ideas in Milk It and Scentless Apprentice. I definitely don't want to write more songs like Pennyroyal Tea and Army, he says. That kind of classic rock and roll verse, chorus, verse, mid-tempo pop song is getting real boring. I want to do more new wave, avant-garde stuff with a lot of dynamics, stops and breaks, and maybe even some samples of weird noises and things. Not samples of instruments. I want to turn into the Butthole Surfers, basically. Of course, the Butthole Surfers have already done the Butthole Surfers quite successfully. Yeah, Kurt says, but it would be our version of it. We won't be able to escape the pop sensibility that we have. It's ingrained in our marrow. We'll never be able to get rid of melody and singing, so I want to try to take a pop song and extend it and have weird mood swings in the middle of the song, where it doesn't just follow this typical rock and roll formula. I'm tired of it. Kurt doubts the band will have any lasting influence, say 20 years from now. Here we are 30 years from now reading his book, right? Reading the biography. He was wrong about that, but I think I think he knew it would have some lasting ability. He's just being modest, I'd say. It's already so rehashed and so plagiarized that it's barely alive now. It's disgusting. I don't think it will be important anymore. It's just mathematics. That's all rock and roll is, Kurt says. Everything's based on 10. There's no such thing as infinity. It repeats itself after 10 and it's over. It's the same thing with rock and roll. The neck is that long on a guitar. There are 6 strings. There's 12 notes, and then it repeats. It can only go to a certain point, and it got to that point 10 years ago. And there will be another band just like the Black Crowes 20 years from now, doing a version of the Black Crowes, doing a version of the Faces. It starts getting watered down every 5 years, Kurt observes. Kids don't even care about rock and roll as much as they used to, as the other generations have. It's already turned into nothing but a fashion statement and an identity for kids to use as a tool for them to fuck and have a social life. At that point, I can't really see music as having any importance to a teenager. I have 2 teenagers, and Kurt was right. This generation doesn't have its own rock and roll. People aren't playing rock and roll like they used to. Kids aren't into it as much as they were when we were kids. However, I notice my own teenagers listening to 90s rock bands. It's like the kids who do like rock and roll have to listen to our generation's music because there's nothing new for them to grab onto. And that's kind of sad. Last couple days I've been listening to my son walking around the house singing Black Hole Sun. I did that when I was his age. When I was 13, I was walking around my parents' house singing Black Hole Sun. I kind of feel sorry for them that they don't have their own thing. Of course, many people are quite content with the notion of rock and roll as nothing but a social and sexual soundtrack, but Kurt thinks it will eventually be superseded. I think they'll use sounds and tones and use it in their virtual reality machine and just listen to it that way and get the same emotions from it and then go to a party. Holy shit. Kurt Cobain in the interviews were done in 92 to 93. Kurt Cobain's predicting AI. He calls it a virtual reality machine. He says kids will their virtual reality machines will make sounds and tones for them, and that's what will cause them to feel emotion. He predicted this shit in 92. Listen to this again. There will be a virtual reality machine there with a whole bunch of headphones, and if you want to talk to people and listen to the virtual reality machine, you can do that, or you can go into the bedroom and fucking drink. But actually, I think virtual reality machines will get you high. Technology will be that good. And then there will be virtual reality junkies, and you'll find them dead on their couch from ODing. By now, a lot of musicians might be pondering solo albums. Krist, who also happens to play some wicked guitar and banjo, says he'd like to do one someday. Except he'd issue it on a 10-inch record only. He says he'd already got some material, a surf song, some beat poetry. It's going to be heavy humor, he says. Dave says he'd like to play guitar and sing in a band someday. Foo Fighters. What else? He has some other bands too, right? He's played with so many musicians, it's hard to even keep up. So Dave says he'd like to play guitar and sing in a band someday. Drums get kind of boring after a while, he admits. He's been quietly piling up material at Laundry Room Studios, playing all the instruments himself. First, he lays down the drum part without any other accompaniment, then adds bass, guitar, and vocals. One of the outtakes from In Utero was a touching, indelible song Dave wrote called Marigold, and there's more where that came from. No, Kurt says. I thought about recording stuff on a 4-track and releasing it, but I wouldn't release it as a Kurt Cobain solo thing. I'd make up a name for it and try to be as anonymous as possible. I really like the idea of lo-fi recordings and to throw out something that hasn't been worked on as feverishly as I would a Nirvana project. Kurt says he's going to start his own label and call it Exploitation Records. I'm just going to record street bums and retarded people and people with deformities and mental deficiencies, he says, and I'm going to have a picture of that person on the front of the album. He did really like the Hey How Are You guy, Johnston, and it's going to be a lo-fi recording, and it's just going to be for novelty reasons, for collector geeks to buy for $20 a piece. I'm not really exploiting the people on the records, I'm exploiting the people who buy them, because there's going to be a $20 price tag on all of them. There will be a limited edition of 500 of the Singing Flipper Boy. Every label needs a distributor, and Exploitation Records will be distributed through one Kurt Cobain. He says he'll simply take a box of records along with him on tour and sell them to record stores at every stop along the way. Kurt also says he wants to re-release all of Nirvana's releases on vinyl, except remastered by recording the sound from boombox speakers so it sounds just like a lo-fi punk record or a bootleg with appropriate cover art. It's just for my own punk rock fantasy of thinking that maybe if Nevermind came out this way, it would sound better, he says. It would only be for me to have a box of them. The way Kurt looks at it, Exploitation Records might turn out to be a much-needed source of income. It's too bad because I spent almost all the money I made off Nevermind fighting for my child because because of the insane rumors created by the media, and now I don't have anything to live off for the rest of my life. Kurt says, this record doesn't sell. You have to sell 8 million records to make $1 million, and the average middle American family makes more than $1 million in a lifetime. I'm not going to be set for life. I'm going to have to get a job in 10 years. That was the last chapter, and then after Kurt passed away, we get a second edition with a final chapter. And at the end, it includes transcript of Courtney reading the supposed note and telling the crowd to call Kurt an asshole. And, I will go ahead and read it for those of you who want to hear what Michael Azerrad had to say after the fact. Over the course of writing this book, I got to know Kurt Cobain pretty well. You can't spend that much time with a person and not become friendly, especially when that person has told you his entire life story. After this book came out in October of '93, we stayed in touch. We'd hang out when the band came to New York for a TV appearance, and Michael Azerrad was in the audience during the MTV Unplugged taping. I'd fly to Seattle to see everybody, and for 2 one-week stretches, I tagged along on Nirvana's final US tour in late '93. In between, Kurt and I would hold marathon phone conversations every couple of weeks. Sometimes we'd talk about whatever music we were listening to. Sometimes we'd gossip a little. Sometimes we'd talk about the upheavals of our lives, but always Kurt would complain very candidly about his career. Things were fine between us until Kurt fell into a coma after ingesting a reported 50 tablets of Rohypnol, a powerful depressant, and some champagne in a hotel room in Rome during the band's last tour in March of '94. We know that's a lie. The doctor from Rome categorically denied that there were 50 pills in Kurt's stomach. He would know because he's the guy who pumped Kurt's stomach. It didn't dawn on me that this was a suicide attempt. It did not dawn on me that this was a unaliving attempt until much later. I should have known immediately. In the meantime, I spoke to CNN and to a reporter I knew at People magazine about it. This definitely upset Courtney and perhaps Kurt too, although his mom assures me Kurt didn't care. I'll never know for sure. In my heart of hearts, I had known that my being a journalist and my friendship with Kurt were on an inevitable collision course. I just thought I could provide some responsible commentary on what happened, but maybe I shouldn't have done it. At any rate, I never spoke to Kurt again. It hardly makes me feel better, but I later learned that virtually everyone close to Kurt had a similar story. That's weird. I can think of 2 people off the top of my head that didn't have a similar story. Jackie Ferry, the nanny, went to visit Kurt at Exodus, said he looked great, he talked great, he was feeling great. Cap Jellin, Babes in Toyland, she said the last time she saw Kurt, they gave each other a big hug, and they had a really in-depth conversation. So I don't know. Azerrad's trying to portray maybe he feels guilty, like it makes him feel better to think that everyone had a bad last meeting with Kurt, but that's definitely not true. Something went terribly wrong right at the end, and as a result, their grief for him is riddled with the same crippling mixture of confusion, regret, and guilt. If his music was any indication, it shouldn't have come as a surprise that Kurt's end was so sudden. After all, not one Nirvana song ends on a fade out, and just as his music played loud against soft, aggressive against melodious, the violence of Kurt's death contrasted with its quiet aftermath. On an uncharacteristically sunny Saturday afternoon, the day after his death was announced, a dozen or so young fans gathered in the small park next to the house, where someone had sat down some candles and flowers. Everybody spoke in hushed tones. There was no music, no boomboxes played, nobody strummed Nirvana tunes on an acoustic guitar. There was just an eerie stillness, a deafening silence that hung over a strange, haunted scene. But there were more representatives of the media than fans hovering around that sprawling gray-shingled Cobain home overlooking Lake Washington. On hand were MTV, Entertainment Weekly, First Person with Maria Shriver, Details, and a gaggle of local media. Several photographers skulked through the undergrowth that covered the hill behind the house, poking their cameras over the fence for a view of the 2-story garage where it all happened. Uniformed security guards with microphones and headsets guarded the driveway, occasionally dipping the yellow police line ribbon for arriving family and friends. "This is sick," said one guard to another as he surveyed the scene. "It's only a house." With so much media and so few fans, many of those mourning in front of the house attained a widespread, if fleeting, celebrity. The mascara-stained face of young Renee Eli made CNN, Newsweek, and the front page of the Seattle Times. Although many fans were quite ready to talk to the media, Seattle scene insiders were another story. Or rather, there was no story at all. In a remarkable show of unity, the key players in the Seattle scene closed ranks decisively and refused to talk to any press. After not one, not 2, but 3 waves of intense media exposure, they had all learned some hard lessons. The media blackout in the wake of his death very effectively protected the privacy of Kurt's friends and family, if only he were alive to see how well it worked. Sub Pop briefly considered barring the press from its long-planned 6th anniversary party at Seattle's Crocodile Cafe that Saturday night, but then realized the media would simply write a story about how they couldn't get in. Still, cameras were not permitted inside the club, so partygoers were greeted by a small media army on the sidewalk outside. Reporters thrust microphones in people's faces and asked, "Why are you here?" In the wake of an unaliving, the question gained an existential force. Some had been calling for the party to be canceled, claiming it was disrespectful, but going ahead with the party was the best thing to do. As Sub Pop's Bruce Pavitt said at Kurt's memorial service the following day, "The most important things in our lives are our friends, our family, and our community." The Seattle scene was founded on a strong sense of community. Community gave rise to the music, nurtured it, kept its most successful members grounded, and provided solace in the face of calamity. As when Mother Love Bones Andrew Wood died of a heroin overdose in 1990, when 7-Year Bitch guitarist Stephanie Sargent fatally overdosed in 92, when the Gits singer Mia Zapata was murdered in 93. And so gathering at the Crocodile, a popular musicians hangout where Nirvana played the occasional surprise gig, was downright necessary. Still, very few partygoers talked about what had just happened. So I'm losing my voice. There are a few pages left. I think I'll include them in a video. The last Nirvana history video in the Nirvana history series, which I also started a long time ago. Let me get a drink. I do apologize. I'm like suddenly just losing my voice, so I'm gonna have to take a break. It gives me a good reason to finish the Nirvana history series. Please leave me a like. Please comment. Audience pushes videos. YouTube will not suggest videos unless your audience is engaging with it, liking it, commenting. And as I said, from here on out, you're gonna see several shorts a week, one common video a week, one big video a month. And I'm hoping to I've never actually tried to grow my channel. I just kind of let it naturally, organically happen. But it's just a challenge. I want to see if I can grow into something bigger, which will allow me to cover even broader subjects and more bands. I really want to just write band documentaries. You know, I think the root of the channel is always going to be the same. But as Kurt said, things get boring after a while. You got to try different things. So, yeah. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Leave me a like and a comment, and I'll try to get back to you. I usually do read over comments within the first 24 to 36 hours, and sometimes even months later, I'll go and look at comments. Thank you for listening, and look forward to what Azerrad had to say, not only the few pages left in this book, but also his article, My Time with Kurt Cobain, will appear in a video format. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Check 1 2. Check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check.